This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Before we get to all of that, we want to talk about a story that's hiding in plain sight. In this episode of In the Loop, we're shining a light on what it's like to live with some disabilities that are often considered invisible. Ones that, unless somebody told you they had them, you just wouldn't know. This includes conditions like diabetes, vision or hearing problems, and chronic pain. There are also things like autoimmune diseases, developmental conditions like autism spectrum disorder, and mental health issues, including anxiety and depression. We don't have an exact sense of how many people are included in this group, as it can depend on how you define a disability, but the CDC estimates that 61 million Americans have a disability that affects major life functions. And the advocacy group Disabled World estimates about 1 in 10 Americans have an invisible disability. If you have a disability, visible or not, you do have some protections. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires employers and many public spaces to provide you with reasonable accommodations, but it's not always that simple.
Fear is the major reason why people with disabilities, invisible or otherwise, don't disclose them. Those who are already employed may be afraid of opening themselves up to any kind of discrimination, but on the other hand, some people don't want to be seen for their disability, which they may consider to be a minor part of their life. So they don't want to disclose that. They don't want to be identified as someone who is disabled or has a disability.
Linda Fisk is the founder of the leadership training program Lead Hership Global. She's pushed for companies to adjust their approaches to make them more inclusive for people with disabilities. She's also experienced some of this firsthand while dealing with her own invisible disabilities, which include diabetes and hearing loss. Linda says even beyond the legal requirements, there's more companies can do to accommodate workers with disabilities.
As an employer, you also can give them a safe place, a designated safe place to have conversation and to receive support and to receive access to company resources. And that brings me to the last point, which is your company can offer support for employees especially with invisible disabilities, by making sure that mental health coverage is included in your company's insurance plan.
The health research nonprofit KFF found that roughly half of all firms provide employer-based healthcare coverage. That usually includes mental health care. Making things more accommodating can be beneficial to the bottom line. A 2018 study by the consulting firm Accenture found that companies they dubbed disability inclusion champions brought in 28% more revenue. But at least one major accommodation for workers with disabilities, remote work, is on the decline. In 2022, LinkedIn data revealed a pretty significant drop in the percentage of job opportunities offering remote work, from 20% in February down to 14% in September. If you don't have a disability and don't know someone firsthand with one, representations in pop culture might be some of the main depictions you see, but it turns out there aren't a whole lot of examples of people with disabilities, especially when it comes to invisible disabilities like chronic pain.
We didn't find there were really that many, so we searched through, hundreds of movies. And although there are a lot of movies that will depict acute pain, so pain due to surgery or trauma or some violent act, in terms of movies that depict patients or characters that have chronic pain, there were very few.
But that oversight isn't stopping some advocates from making sure that disabilities of all forms are presented with sensitivity and accuracy on screen. One person who has dedicated their work to doing exactly that joins us now. Lauren Applebaum is Senior Vice President for Communications and Entertainment and News Media at Respectability. They're a nonprofit working to change how society views and values people with disabilities. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, without a doubt. You've worked with dozens of different productions on their portrayal of characters with disabilities. What are some particularly important things a viewer should be looking out for when it comes to how a show portrays someone with a disability?
We often come across some negative tropes that we try to avoid seeing on screen. For example, this idea that someone who acquires a disability, which is something that happened to me in my own personal life, the idea that life may not be worth living after acquiring certain disabilities. And that can obviously have a very negative effect on people's lives when they acquire a disability, or when other people learn that a friend of theirs acquired a disability. There's another trope that's out there, this idea called inspiration porn, the idea that the disabled character exists only to prop up the non-disabled, mainly lead, and basically show this non-disabled lead having some sort of act of humanity in the way that they interact with their disabled peer. A lot of it goes back to this idea of not giving disabled characters a 360 personality. Yeah, they might be disabled, but might also, be a parent or be a teacher or be a dancer or so many other things in life that someone could be. And having a disability is just one aspect of someone's life.
Can you give us some examples, maybe some particularly good examples of this being well done in shows or movies that you can think of?
There's one show on Netflix that I had the chance to work on. It premiered in January 2020 called The Healing Powers of Dude. And basically was about this idea of the main character. He himself had really bad social anxiety, and he therefore had been homeschooled for a while. And what this show did is it kind of helped normalize the idea of having anxiety as a child, because I think a lot of times people think that only adults have anxiety, but it very much exists among people of all ages. And what I love about this show is that one of his best friends was Amara, played by Sophie Kim, a middle schooler who is an actress with muscular dystrophy and uses a power wheelchair. So what was really nice is you were able to see in this show both a non-visible and a visible disability, and those disabilities both being considered, equal in terms of disability.
Something that we've kind of touched on before, Hollywood is full of people who have disabilities, especially invisible ones. Millions of people live with invisible disabilities. So why do you think it has taken such a long time for them to even be shown in pop culture and to be shown accurately?
I think there are a few things. One is when you have a non-visible disability, you may choose to not share it. You may choose to not be public about it because, unfortunately, there is a stigma that exists out there. When I acquired my disability, people came to me and said, "Oh, how are you still going to be a mom and work and all of these things?" And I'm like, I'm just going to figure it out. And yeah, I had to learn how to do some things differently, but I'm still able to succeed in all of these areas, just doing it maybe in a slightly different way than I had before. But what happens is a lot of times people are really just terrified of disclosing their disability, because when they do, it's quite possible that some people will assume that they're less capable. Without having disabled people behind the camera as writers, in casting, as directors, we're not going to get the stories that we deserve to see on screen. We need to have disabled folks behind the camera working to be able to create these stories from their lived experience.
Lauren Applebaum is Senior Vice President for Communications and Entertainment and News Media at Respectability. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
We're glad Lauren could take some time to chat with us about some of this. It's worth noting that Respectability isn't alone in this project. There's also groups like Hollywood Health and Society, a project from the University of Southern California, which offers writers and creative decision makers resources to make sure they're telling the story of disability accurately.
So we make a point of encouraging writers to work with us. Our services are free. We don't take a credit on the show. We're purely in the interest of public health, and it behooves shows to get it right, because audiences are smart.